I'll start off with some clarification. I'm not actually going to review the gameplay of Pokémon X and Y. No one needs a gameplay review of Pokémon, and if I were to do a gameplay review of Pokémon, it would be on Black and White, the games which started my lifelong journey a decade ago. Instead, I'll be reviewing the changes and enhancements specific to these entries. X and Y make a lot of changes, so I'll start with the very first one, character customization. Generally, I'm one to stick to the canon outfits in most games, unless there is an armor rating system, and I did this with X and Y as well, so I suppose I don't really want to talk about the cosmetics you can equip. But I do want to talk about how you can pick your character's ethnicity. This is a cool but subtle way of telling players that their dads are never coming home from the cigarette store. Skin tone is a given for every game with a custom character creator, but you run into a problem when your character is a child who lives with their parents. Fortunately, Pokémon has almost never given the main character a father, so this allows the player to make themselves whatever race they want. In fact, it's not a coincidence that the only game where this feature hasn't returned is the one where the main character meets their father. Moving on to actual gameplay, X and Y introduce a feature I've wanted in Pokémon games since before I was in middle school. Pokémon are me. I'm sure we all have very fond memories of playing with our toys as kids. My toys were all Pokémon plushies, and instead of throwing them into each other as most 10-year-olds would do, I pretended I was travelling with them. A me is the realization of a feature I never even considered could happen. It is so stinking adorable. This is everything I could have asked for Pokémon playdates. It's like Game Freak put this feature in precisely for me and all the other kids with Pokédolls, and Sword and Shield did it even better. The Kalos Regional Pokédex is the largest one in the history of the franchise, and with Pokémon, bigger is almost always better. Pokémon's greatest strength lies in its Pokédex, and the sheer volume of options it gives its players. With X and Y being the biggest Pokémon games to date, it gives the player billions of party compositions and billions of moveset options. It's almost a mathematical impossibility that someone beat this game with the exact same party you did. That's astonishing, and it's Pokémon's greatest strength. But then I said I wouldn't review the actual gameplay of Pokémon. I'd review the changes X and Y make. There's only one downside to having a massive regional dex, but positives first. It keeps its completionists busy, gives massive options to the metagame, and means that you can recreate your old teams in new ways. I still think I prefer what Black and White did, and only give access to the old Pokémon after forcing you to use the new cast, rather than bringing back as many old ones as possible. Speaking of which, X and Y was the beginning of a trend that most likely continues to this day, the dwindling of new Pokémon. There are only 71 Pokémon native to Kalos. On the one hand, it's great that there are more Pokémon in this game than ever before, but the trade-off is there aren't as many new Pokémon. Obviously, with a roster fast approaching the quadruple digits, more and more drawbacks have to be made to fit every Mon into every game. That's why I felt absolutely no animosity towards Game Freak during Dexit. It was simply the result of 20 years of their hard work finally catching up with them. But fandoms will be fandoms. I shudder to think of how time-consuming it was to recreate every Pokémon with a 3D model while still maintaining an annual release schedule. So if there are now simply too many Pokémon to repeat that miracle 6 years later, in porting from the 3DS to the Switch, why should we meet those developers with animosity? But does fewer new Pokémon mean all the new Pokémon are good? Not exactly. In the really great generations like 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7, you can feel this thread in between all the new Pokémon, like they all fit together as part of a big family. I don't get that feeling with Kalos Pokemon. They're not haphazard, they just don't feel like they all come from the same region. Even though Game Freak will never do it again after Dexit, I wish each new game was more like Black and White, where every generation there are 150 new Pokemon that you must use for the campaign. Then the post-game brings in some old ones, and then you can port them to a new game with even more classic Pokemon. Or just make a new Pokemon game every 3 years instead of the annual franchise that they're failing at. Now let's talk about the biggest shakeups X and Y make: Fairies and Megas. When I first heard about Fairy types, I thought they sounded too similar to Psychic types. And I was right. Fairies are just cuter Psychic types, but mechanically they're exciting. Type weaknesses aren't chosen out of balance, instead they're chosen based on how types interact in the real world. Some are obvious, like the Fire, Water and Grass trio, but some are more interesting, like how you can't poison something made of steel, or how psychics can predict the moves of close-quarters fighters. But fairies aren't real, so they have to get creative with how fairies interact with other types. Fairies are strong against dragons and dark types, because in fairy tales, the hero always defeats the Dark Overlord and saves the princess from a dragon. They're weak to steel because fairies are vulnerable to cold iron in old legend, and weak to poison is a reference to Snow White and her poisoned apple. Fairies fit incredibly well in Kalos, as there's a lot of architecture reminiscent of medieval times, especially the Pokémon League, although I do wish they were light types instead, just to add a bit of symmetry to Dark. X and Y were also the first games to begin the gimmick tradition that continues to this very day, and they absolutely started with the best one. The design of Mega Pokemon is on another level, how these forms accentuate their best features and make them appear in Super Saiyan-like forms. The Pokemon that Game Freak selected were a combination of popularity and ones that needed a boost, adding new types to the Pokemon that needed them, and capping it all off with one of the greatest designed Pokemon of all time, Mega Charizard X. Of course, I don't think there's a single bad Mega Evolution from a visual design point, but some of these guys were just broken, Kangaskhan in particular. But I think the fandom agrees that out of all the gimmicks the series has introduced, Mega Evolution is by far the best. I like how, unlike Z-moves and Dynamaxing, you can predict Mega Evolution when you see someone's team, instead of always having to brace for the possibility that your opponent could hit the big red button at any time. It's a lot more of a balanced mechanic, and it feels more special when only a handful of Pokemon have the capability to go Ultra Instinct, and it just doesn't feel as extraordinary when the whole cast can do it. Pokémon X and Y was a game that took the series to a whole new art style, scope, handheld, and dimension, all whilst maintaining a yearly release schedule. Its new ideas for the battle system are rival to none in the whole franchise, in amount and ingenuity. It's not my favourite Pokemon game, but it's probably the best one.